Hello there. Hmm. You know, life is risky, right? I say so because life is full of uncertainties. And I and Tony believe that to live and thrive, we must be able to manage these uncertainties. So today on Live and Thrive, Tony will be talking to us about risk management. So Tony, what exactly is risk management?
Hello, folks. Always good to be here. I'll start with a quote from T.S. Eliot, and it goes like this: "Only those who will risk going too far can possibly find out how far one can go." If you don't risk going too far, you're certainly not going to make progress, and you'll probably not thrive. But before we can talk about risk management, let's try and understand what risk is. So a risk essentially involves uncertainty about the effects and implications of an activity with respect to our plans. So what that means is you're planning to thrive, you have laid out all the action steps you're going to take, but there are certain things that will work against that plan, and they may happen. So in order for you to manage risks, therefore, what you do is to scan the environment for what can possibly go wrong or right, and you decide how likely they are going to be and how injurious or catastrophic or even beneficial they may be, and then determining what actions you can take and the consequences therefore, so that you can be able to stay on course to achieve your goals. So for you to be effective in risk management, you are trying to manage future outcomes in a proactive way. Someone once said that the biggest risk is not taking a risk. Clearly, from that quote earlier on, you need to go a bit, stretch things a bit so that you know how far you can go. So there's something called risk taking. Risk taking essentially involves moving out of our comfort zones, doing something that has inherent danger or possible negative outcomes so that we can achieve our goal. One interesting question that they always ask kids is, why did the chicken cross the road? The usual answer has been to get to the other side. But usually the other side is probably where it is likely to find food. So if it didn't cross the road, risking getting run over by a bus, it probably won't get any food. So risk-taking is part of what makes us succeed in our desires. But risk-taking should not be mistaken for risky behavior. Risky behavior are usually very dangerous and potentially very harmful. Examples are like thrill driving or even driving drunk. Thrill driving is just driving just for the thrill of it and driving at extremely high speeds, and it usually has dangerous consequences. There's another feature we need to talk about, which is risk appetite. We are all different individuals. So we have different levels of risk that we are willing to take when we are pursuing our goals. It's important to try and identify how much risk you are willing to take when you are pursuing all these goals, because knowing that helps us to manage the outcomes in our goal setting. Thank you so much.
Wow, very well said. So to achieve our goals, we must necessarily experience and take risks. As long as we don't live riskily. So what are the kind of risks we can expect in life?
Yes, risks come in various forms. Of course, let us assume that our goal is to have meaningful relationship. There is a risk that it can become toxic. The person we are relating with is an evil person, but we didn't know that at the beginning. We can start a business and the conditions change. You can look for a job only to find that the culture in that company is not very nice. It's not a nice place to work. So there are so many types of risks, but let's look at some critical ones that usually affect us as individuals. I'll start with what I'll call strategic risks. So this is where your vision will not be achieved. Things that can happen that will prevent your vision from getting achieved. Usually, a strategic risk is made up of other smaller risks that add up to something that can lead to overall failure of your dream or your goal. There are also other risks like what I call compliance or regulatory risks. You might start a business and suddenly the government comes up with a new law that makes that business illegal, for example. Or they now require you to go through so many extra steps before you can run that business, which you did not anticipate in your planning. So there's a risk of that happening. There's also what they call financial risks. Financial risks include a change in interest rates, for example. You had planned to start a business and you had estimated that the loans will cost you so much, only to find out that they have now increased the rates, and now all the numbers you have worked out are no longer going to work. Or in your business, your customers are not meeting their payment obligations in a timely manner, which messes up your cash flow, and that could be a threat to the business. There's also what I'll call operational risks. Operational risks are like equipment malfunctioning or breaking down, or somebody stealing your part of your goods or your resources. There's also reputational risks, where if you're in a business where people trust, you need trust for them to be your client. If there's something that maligns your image, you might lose business. So there's also such a risk. Or if one of your representatives goes out to damage your reputation, for example. There's so many cases of banks that have folded up because some of their employees made really bad decisions to spoil the image of the bank. Then there's also what I'll call economic risks. Economic risks are changes in conditions. It could be political, social, and the macroeconomy. For example, the import becomes cumbersome where you are. There are new tariffs that have been introduced. Inflation is galloping. All those sort of things are the kind of risks that one will face in achieving our purpose. So that's
Wow. Obviously, risk cannot be avoided altogether. I mean, marriage is risky, changing jobs is risky, running a business is risky, but we must take this risk. So how can one manage risks better? Since we can't avoid.
okay. So risk management, there are so many theoretical ways to manage risk, but I'll just try and make it as simple as possible. The first thing to do is to know what it is you are really trying to achieve, because it's only then that you'll be able to analyze what can go wrong. Understand why you are trying to achieve that thing. Is it for fun? Because there are times we take risks just to have fun. Or is it for profit? Or is it a risk that if we're able to do things right, people are going to respect us more? So you need an understanding of why you're taking that risks, or what your action is. Then you go on to what I'll call the identification of risks. You need to be able to figure out what can go wrong or right. There are so many tools that have been developed to help us in this process. But I'll just use a very simple one called the PESTEL. PESTEL means you first look at what are the political things that can go wrong. Is there like elections coming up and a new government coming in? Are they likely to have the right attitude to the business or to the action you want to take? Then you look at the economy or the economic conditions. Is there inflation? What are the job numbers like? Things like that. Then you look at social factors. Social factors, of course, what are the kind of things happening in society that can affect what you would like to do? What are the trends, and things like that. Then there's technology too. Whatever we want to do in life, usually technology can come in. Imagine, I don't know, you are trying to achieve something that involves manual labor, and somebody just invents a new machine that can do what you plan to do faster, cheaper. It might mean it could run you out of business. So you need to be able to think through all those areas. There's also, of course, the environmental factors. Environment, what is it a viable environment you're working in? Are there threats in the environment? You need to scan the environment too. Then the final one is the legal. What are the laws like? Are there laws that could work in your favor or work against you? So by the time you do that PESTEL analysis, you would have been able to identify most of the risks, most of the things that could threaten what you're about to do. And if it's a big organizational thing, it is suggested you do it in a group so that people can throw in other options, because you may not be able to think this through by yourself. So after you have identified all the risks, then there's the next step called the evaluation, to actually determine how likely is this thing to happen. Then you also assess, if it happens, how much damage or how much good can it do to us? Mm. So for all the risks, you cannot put them in different buckets. Is it highly likely? And if it's highly likely and highly dangerous, you put it in a bucket. Is it highly likely but less dangerous? Because there are some risks that are highly likely, but the impact is not so significant. For example, if your car doesn't start in the morning, for example, but you have a second car, the risk is not so high. But imagine that you had a blown engine. That may be a high risk, especially if you don't have another car, and that's the only means by which you could achieve your purpose. So that happens. Then there are also some other things that are not likely, they're not very likely to happen, but if they happen, they will hurt your goals or your plans significantly. So that would be a low probability, high impact risks. Then there is also the low probability, low impact risks. So when you have put them in the different boxes, those 4 boxes, usually what you do is to give priority to the high probability, high impact risks. Then the next one you consider will be the high probability, low impact, and low probability, high impact. Then finally, the low probability, low impact ones, you may just ignore them because treating risk also costs money or costs you resources, time, energy, whatever. So you have to optimize your time by using this risk matrix that I've just talked about. So after you've done all that, you've prioritized your risks, then you will look at what I'll call a mitigation strategy, which we will discuss in further details later on. So mitigation strategy is, what do we do about these risks? You know, what are the kind of things that we can do about them? After you have done that, you document those risks and the action steps and who is to take the action. It's not enough to say, okay, it's likely to rain, I'll carry an umbrella. Your risk management plan should identify who is to carry the umbrella. You'll be shocked that if you don't assign responsibility, it doesn't get done. Mm. If you are the one to do it yourself, then note, I'm to do this. If it's some assistant you're going to use to do that, then list it against that assistant. And if possible, put a date against when they should do it. Once you have done all that, you start watching out to see as things are happening, because at times the risks, of course, is a probability event. So it may happen, it may not happen. Wow. Imagine you want to have a party in the garden and you have assessed that, oh, there's a 30% chance of rain. You might decide, okay, there's no need to worry about preparing against rain. But that doesn't mean it won't rain. What if it rains? What are you going to do? So that's how all these things work. And as you're monitoring, there might be changes in the environment, like I said, in the pastel analysis. Even as you have to routinely keep checking, are the conditions at the time of planning against my risks, are they still the same? If there are changes, then you must update your risk management plan. You see, life is a continuous process. You can't prepare anything and just sit back and say, hey, I've prepared. Because your preparation may just not be enough because there are new conditions. A new law can just come in after you have made your risk management plan. You have to adjust your plan and document it and follow up after that again. So those are the steps you take when you're managing your risks.
Amazing. Okay, thank you. So in the event of hazards, that's when life happens. What can one do? Simply, how do we treat risks?
Well, like I said, many types of risks occur in our day-to-day lives and endeavors, and they require different ways of handling them. One of the ways you could do that is what they call avoidance. When you want to avoid a risk, you try to ensure that the conditions that enable it are removed. One example of that was the work from home protocol that a lot of companies adopted to prevent the spread of the disease. So risk avoidance essentially takes out the conditions that enable that risk to manifest. You could also adopt a strategy of reduction or mitigation of the risk. This means you either reduce the probability of the risk occurring or the impact it can have on you. An example of that would be something like installing a burglar bar on your windows and doors. That way you minimize the possibility of being burgled. One other way of managing risk is what they call sharing or transferring. In that scenario, what you do with the risk is you shift some of the responsibility to other people. That way, you can still continue with whatever you intend to do while the other person handles the risk. Example of that would be like insuring your property, for example. You know, then you could also do what I'll call acceptance of the risk. Oftentimes, managing risks comes with a cost. If you want to avoid a risk, it costs money. If you want to reduce the risk or its impact, it costs money. If you want to share the risk, it also costs money. So there are times you just say to yourself, all these costs are too much compared to the possible damage it can do to me. So you accept the risk. Usually this occurs for those risks that have low probability and low impact. Then there's a final type of treatment you can give a risk. If you recall my definition earlier, I said risk is not just about negative events. There are times positive events happen as well. So when you're scanning the environment, it's also worthwhile to think about things that could happen that will make it easier for you to achieve your goal. Let me use an example. Let us say you want to start selling shoes and you have drawn up your budget. The biggest part of your budget is setting up a store where you would display your shoes. Then suddenly you now discover that you can actually set up a website from where you can sell even more shoes and it won't cost you that much money. That will be a positive opportunity. And it's what you do is you exploit such a risk. So those are the 5 basic ways in which we treat risks.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we know life is full of risks, and you spoke about acceptance of risk. But the truth is, it's impossible to thrive in life without taking risks. But what is safe risk? And how much is too much? How much can we accept?
All right. So at the beginning of this discussion, I tried to differentiate between risk taking and risky behavior. There's a thin line between them. Some people have become incredibly successful in life because they pushed way past the boundary that some of us will have thought, wow, this guy is making a very big mistake here. Classic examples will be people like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, who left school from where they could have gotten very nice jobs to start businesses that they were not sure would even succeed. So I'm going to give you a few tips to help you know when a risk becomes risky. So the first thing, your vision. Don't forget, look into our video on vision because you need to have an overarching purpose for you to be able to do things successfully. Understand why your purpose is. Then you need to know how much risks you are willing to take. Some people do not have the appetite to take big risks. If you are such a person and you take a big risk, chances are that you will not be able to manage the situation as well as those risk-taking people with higher appetite, that is. It's always also good to do a small analysis of what I'll call the risk-reward analysis. Imagine you are risking $1 million to earn $500,000. That is a very bad idea right from the start. So doing that analysis is also a useful tool. It's also a good thing to network Test your ideas before you rush into them. You can do, if it's a technology type thing, you do a prototype, see that it works, try it in all scenarios before you rush into full investment. And it is highly recommended that you be honest with yourself, especially when assessing things that can go wrong. Don't be overly optimistic. Optimism is useful, make no mistake about that. But if it goes in the extreme, you might overlook important risks and you will not be prepared for them. And probably the most important tip I'll give here is that you must keep learning. You can never know enough to be the best you can be. So on that note, I'll wrap up with a quote from Warren Buffett. And it says, the risk comes from not knowing what you're doing. So I join you to remember your ABC, always be committed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You see, if your main strategy for survival in this life is not to take any risk, then failure is guaranteed. But then your big why will determine how much you are willing to give up or risk. Honestly, it's been an amazing time today. Thanks for watching this video. Please watch our other videos on Live and Thrive channel on YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe, and share. Bye-bye for now.